So, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to give you a brief overview on agriculture in Flanders and the treats to our Flemish farmers from the EU. Very quickly about myself, I'm a member of the Vlaams Belang party in the Flemish parliament, and as you probably know, Vlaams Belang is part of the ID group in the European Parliament. My main concern in the Flemish Parliament is actually the Welfare Committee, where I have been the leading member of our party since 2019. I was born in Roeselare, which is in West Flanders, in a region which is known for its farming. And that's why it's always kept me interesting a lot in the Agriculture Committee and the Parliament, where I've been a guest on several occasions for interpreting the minister. Flanders. Flanders is a part of Belgium, which is a federal state, which means some of the competences are only for the federal government, some are divided, and some others are exclusive for the Flemish parliament. On the slide, you can see some of the competence of Flanders, which includes agriculture. A very small part of agriculture is not Flemish, but federal. Their job is to watch over the safety of the food chain and the quality of the food. Today, I'll be giving you a quick overview of the situation on the agriculture numbers in Flanders, as well of some of our biggest problem files. In many cases, they are related to the. Excuse me. So, first of all, some numbers. Flanders currently has a bit less than 22,500 farms. And you can see that in 2005, this number was still close to 35,000. This means there's already been a 1/3 decrease in less than 20 years. There have been years where almost 1,000 farmers have stopped, and it's also not likely that the number of farmers will increase soon. The average age of the Flemish farmer was 40 years only 20 years ago. Today, it's 55 years old. Almost half of our farmers have livestock only. We've always been known as a meat exporter, and we've always been rightfully proud of the quality of our meat. Nevertheless, this tradition of exporting is more and more endangered, as we'll talk about immediately. Arable farming accounts 1/3 of our farms. Earlier, I told you I was born in Roeselare, which is in West Flanders. This province clearly has the most of the farms in Flanders and accounts to 60% of all farms, together with the one in East Flanders. Even though Flanders is relatively small, looking at the total territory of 30,500 square kilometers, there are definitely differences to be observed in several regions. Specific of West Flanders and Antwerp, specific parts of West Flanders and Antwerp will be consisting mostly out of livestock farms, for example, whereas in the province surrounding Brussels, which is Vlaams Brabant, there's a bit more arable farms. And Limburg, on the other hand, you'll find a lot of Flemish fruit. The classic products from there are the apples, the pears, and the cherries. So that was a quick overview of the numbers of agriculture in Flanders, but I would like to talk about some of the most important problems files for our farmers and by extension, European farmers. I could obviously speak about the common agriculture policy and the difficulties it brings with for Flemish, French, Czechs, or basically for all the EU farmers, but I'd like to focus on some other topics. Some of those are well known, others might be a bit more unknown, at least in some of the EU countries, but nevertheless, that doesn't mean they will remain hidden forever, as I'll explain in a second. The 7 problems we'll discuss today are the nitrogen issue, manure issue, the nature restoration law, agri-bashing, the Flemish lease legislation, administration, and farmers' mental well-being. So, first of all, there is no way around the problem that's been holding Flemish agriculture and all possible innovations and the future for Flemish agriculture captive since the beginning of last year. Stikstof. As you would say in English, nitrogen. As you know, in May 1992, the European Union adopted the Habitats Directive designed to protect the most seriously threatened habitats and species around Europe. Together with the Bird Directive adopted earlier, 13 years earlier, they have formed the cornerstone of Europe's conservation policy and make up the Natura 2000 network of protected areas. In Flanders, the government now decided the use and emission of nitrogen of farms is suddenly the biggest threat to habitats and species. And I say suddenly because in 2019, when the Flemish government was formed, the whole nitrogen issue wasn't even in their coalition agreement. Yet last year, this became big when in February 22, they made a nitrogen agreement in which they agreed how to reduce nitrogen emission and deposition on Natura 2000 areas in Flanders. The rules they agreed upon were simply horrendous and simply means the end of Flemish agriculture. Climate organizations and even left parties who are not part of the government applauded this agreement and even wanted the government to go even further in their bullying the Flemish farmers. When asked for an explanation of why they want to do this exactly, the responsible minister, Zuhal Demir of N-VA, which is a so-called right-wing party and part of the ECR in the European Parliament, said they have to do it because of Europe. She referred to Natura 2000 for that. The fact that her own party always blindly vote in favor of basically every new and stricter law concerning nature in the European Parliament is something she didn't mention. And actually, the EU never said this nitrogen issue had to be solved in the way the Flemish government is solving it now. But as it becoming clear in Flanders and the Netherlands, government and climate organizations will not hesitate to use EU laws and directives in order to bully the farms out of business. Flanders and the Netherlands are rather unique concerning their population density and overlap of cities, farms, industries, and nature, but make no mistake, what is happening in Flanders today will happen in other countries sooner or later. Some examples of what is agreed upon are written down here on the slide. Several farms have closed or will be closed, even if they had a permit. Other farms must decrease or all of their emission in only a handful of years by up to 60% at a time where no new innovations are being recognized by the government. And when we know that Flemish farms are already very innovative and clean. The government also wants at least 30% less pigs and also a huge reduction of other livestock numbers. And finally, some arable farms could see a total manure stop in 28. I believe it's definitely not an exaggeration to call these so-called solutions to the nitrogen issue widely out of proportion. As you know and are able to see on this map here, Flanders is a small state, and every business within a radius of some 100 meters to even kilometers nearby the red areas on the map would be subjected to stricter rules. Basically, that is almost all agriculture in Flanders. And the Flemish farmers, just like every other EU farmer, really need a level playing field. It's no funny to see how nitrogen is such a big issue in Flanders, but even if you have a farm that just is as big or even bigger, a couple of kilometers more to the south and you're in Wallonia, suddenly there wouldn't be no more nitrogen problem. Farmers also need a level playing field regarding the industry. Our party is definitely in favor of having industry in the country, as industry is vital for the economy as well. Nevertheless, with the current agreement, the emission values for farmers would be 40 times higher than for the industrial companies. Our party can support this one-side view where certain civilians are more worth less than others. And this brings us to the topic of a livelihood assurance. with permits being withdrawn even after formal approval, our farmers have no more certainty of anything. It's impossible to operate a company, their farm like this, and it's also almost impossible to obtain any kind of loan for certain innovations. Obviously, new possible farmers are also less likely to get into the profession because of all this. We have seen the nitrogen issue arise in the Netherlands as well, where it has also been linked a lot with this live food assurance. Out of nowhere, the Farmers' Party BBB won the Senate elections in March this year, whereas our friends from the PVV also supported the farmers and the live food assurance of both farmers and other civilians as well heavily, leading to their landslide victory in the elections last week. Then we get to something else. That's the Manure Action Plan. The European Water Framework Directive sets out requirements for a healthy water system. Every time Flanders creates a new manure action plan to put new and/or stricter limitations on the use of manure for farmers in order to fulfill these requirements from the EU. Just as with the nitrogen issue, the Flemish government used an EU directive to bully our farmers and convince the other citizens that it must be done because of the EU say so. So once a EU directive is the cause for a national regional government to increase the pressure applied on our farmers. And the nitrogen issue has been going on since February last year and is still not done at all. There's been a third agreement this month, but nothing has been put into law, and it's even not certain the State Council will approve of these rules. They have been very hard on the previous agreements, and they said they didn't make any sense whatsoever, with the legislation also being called legal malpractice. And we can see a similar scenario with the Manure Action Plan as well. This has been going on since the end of last year, and we are still now here today. Some of the incredible propositions by the government includes the fact that no manure should be used up until 6 meters of any form of water. Meanwhile, the reality in Flanders is that many farms are surrounded by little creeks. A farm of, for example, 5,000 square meters could be all of a sudden reduced to a farm of approximately 4,000 square meters. Meanwhile, the minister wants to forbid any harvesting of potatoes after September 1st, which in reality means 80% of the Flemish potatoes. What the minister and high officials do not seem to understand is that the weather doesn't blindly follow the rules and dates set by them. It reminds me of the famous quote by Dwight Eisenhower, who said, "Farming looked mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from the cornfield." But like I mentioned, both the nitrogen question and with this problem file farmers have been totally uncertain about what to expect and when to expect it for over a year now, which obviously causes a lot of headaches and stress. Just like with the nitrogen question, the government, but also climate organizations and any EU member state can start demanding crazy legislation like this. During negotiation on Thursday, November 9th, a preliminary agreement was reached on the infamous Nature Restoration Bill. Despite several attempts to send it back to the European Commission or even reject it completely, the controversial bill is still alive and well. Our party, Vlaams Belang, will continue to fight the absurd law together with our European partners in the ID group. Climate fanaticism must be stopped somewhere. It has become a religion divorced from any sense of reality. And the media is now painting a picture that the compromise is a watered down version of the nature restoration law, but that does not mean anything. Despite the fact that the proposed law is less radical than the initial proposal, it should be stopped by all possible means. After all, if it is passed, the law will serve as a foundation on which a follow-up law then will be built, in which all the initial radical proposals will return. That is how it always goes. The problem with the nature restoration law is that it is in fact a law and not a directive, which means it will become European law. This law will then be used by the bureaucrats, lobbyists, and NGOs to fight all kinds of court battles. This agreement is also yet another stop on the already controversial path on an even more controversial law. Delays, failed committee votes, and then still the controversial adoption in the European Parliament. They have truly tried everything to keep this fanatical climate law alive. These maneuvers come as no surprise. The green climate fanatics are still trying to push through as much climate legislation as possible in the last month to the European elections. So after all, they fear they will lose their already narrow left liberal majority in the next term. Besides, supposedly right-wing parties have also collaborated on 4 years. Entrenched centre parties thought they could achieve a rejuvenation in their crumbling electorate by surfing along on the climate agenda. They too will pay the electoral price for this. People, young or old, are fed up with these invasive climate regulations to seek to control every facet of human life, from how one moves around to what one eats. And I'm confident that the electorate will bring about a reversal next year. So that's already 3 big problems, files for not only Flemish but also other EU farmers. And I briefly like to discuss the 4th one as well, agri-bashing. There used to be a lot of respect for our farmers, as they put the food on our table. They work very hard and very long hours with very few days off. But at the point that respect starts to decrease. That's where we see the increase of agri-bashing throughout the years. Left-wing parties, government, ministers, and also climate organizations keep putting farmers in a bad light, portraying them as culprits of environmental damage, wildlife, and poor animal welfare. Even in Flemish schools, even in Flemish school books, there are images of farms being very polluting and farmers doing nothing for the animal welfare of their stock. And I can imagine this is the same in other countries. We can also observe the youth being less and less conscious about what farmers actually do and where the food on their plates come from. This is definitely very worrying, according to us. But luckily, we did notice in Flanders in the last couple of months is that the very negative view on farmers is slightly turning. There are a lot of people in the countryside that are starting to talk about this, to mention how unfair their farmers, their neighbors are being treated in press, school, and by the government, and how they cannot support any party or organization that looks at farmers in that outdated view of how bad they are for the environment. And we, Vlaams Belang as a party, definitely support it. We believe our farmers are very environmentally conscientious and our most important allies in the struggle for a better environment. The previous problems were all related to the EU, and I think we can all agree that the past year and a half has already been a big hit for all Flemish and EU farmers. In addition to that, after decades of no change, the Flemish government recently renewed the lease legislation for farmers who don't have their own agricultural land but are renting or leasing them. In the legislation, you can find now a line how the government always has a preemptive right over the farmers themselves when their current lease ends, thanks to the possible public benefit. This means that when a farmer's lease is ending and he wants to actually buy the ground he's farming on or continue his lease, the government can basically prevent this. Their lease stops and the government buys the land at an incredibly high price with the farmer's own tax money, even fertile farmland. You already know that Flanders is a relatively small and clearly does not have a lot of free land that can be used for farming purposes. So actually finding a place to farm on has become very difficult, both for existing farmers and also possible for new farmers. The price for a hectare of agriculture land in my province in West Flanders, for example, was €77,000 last year. Becoming a farmer is simply impossible. This point, together with the EU-related problem files, bring me to the last point I'd like to discuss with you. As you know, I'm a member of the Welfare Committee, so the farmers' mental well-being is extremely important. The legislation becoming stricter, together with the tons of administration and many problem files, has been causing immense stress in the Flemish farmer population and without a doubt in many other member states. If we look at the statistics from 21 to 22, we saw an increase of 30% of Flemish farmers asking questions about psychological help, an immense increase which is very likely to happen again this year. Farmers are not known to be the most talkative people about their mental well-being, so this number should really be ringing several bells. That's why our goal for the next year is to be victorious in the Flemish and European elections. All the classical political parties and left-wing radicalists are destroying the future of our agriculture and the present of our farmer citizens. I want to thank you for your paying attention and sharing concerns around our agriculture and especially the future of agriculture in Europe. It's our duty to restore the importance of agriculture in our society.